Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is calling on the White House to de-escalate tensions with Russia and even suggested the president should meet with Vladimir Putin. He made those comments in a speech last night in New Hampshire. Kennedy is challenging President Biden for the party's nomination. He's also an anti-vaccine activist and has been accused of spreading misinformation. For more on this, let's bring in James Pindell. He's a political reporter for the Boston Globe. James, thanks so much for joining us. The first question, even before we talk about Kennedy's speech last night, is, and this is a question that journalists are struggling with as we look ahead to 2024, is should we treat Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s pronouncements about vaccines, about cell phones, about all kinds of things that he says that are not rooted in scientific fact, as serious, even as he's contending for the nomination for the presidency of the United States?
I understand the question, and I just don't understand why we're still talking about this in 2023. Look, we dismissed Donald Trump in 2015. He's not a serious candidate. He doesn't have a serious following. And further, it's not like the media can be gatekeepers. They used to be. He's running around. He's on all these different podcasts. He's using all the different types of methods. We're showing scenes of his speech last night in New Hampshire, a packed audience. How is he reaching these people? It's not like the Boston Globe or CBS News can determine who we're going to platform or not. I mean, at one level you can, but it's not like he's not out there. I think more news organizations should cover him seriously because he is serious. He is at 20-something% in the polling. And look at how we're covering Nikki Haley, who's at 3%, or Mike Pence, who's at 6%. He's at 20%. I'm not sure he's going to be the nominee structurally, obviously. I think it's more likely he'll end up at a convention next year, the Republican convention in the speaking spot, not the Democratic one. That's all fair. And it's not as though I'm excusing the non-scientific things he says. And if people want to say it's dangerous, some of it is dangerous. I agree, I accept the premise, but then cover him and cover how it's dangerous. Cover why he's at 20% right now. That's where I'm at in this question. Obviously, I'm pretty animated.
But that's exactly what I wanted to hear from you, because I think that's an important point that you make. 2 points that stick out to me. One is legacy media is not the gatekeeper, and frankly, we've never have been. But he has these other outlets and opportunities to get his message across, which is why, as you point out, he's at 20%. And the other point that you make, which I really think is crucial for people to understand, is when he does say things that are not rooted in scientific fact, this is where it is our responsibility to point it out. And that's what you've been doing in your reporting. And so that's why
Vlad, one more point on this, because I think this is important for the audience. Look, after Donald Trump won the presidency, we had all these books come out and all this deep thinking. What the heck just happened? Why are people thinking this way? So you know what? Let's do this right. Let's not make the same mistake. Let's do this right now. Why are people skeptical about vaccines? What can we do to educate? Go forward. Anyway.
That's an excellent point.
So then what did we hear him say that sort of stood out? And how did it go over with the audience? I'm actually really curious about who was in the audience.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't in the audience. I did watch the speech. I've been very curious about these Kennedy audiences and where they have, I have gone to his events, but where it's interesting about it is, at the beginning, it was a bit of a Kennedy thing here. I'm curious. He's interested. And that explains why he was at, 15, 16, 17% in the beginning. Does not explain why he's even higher today. I mean, look, if anyone does follow any, news stories about Kennedy, it's very obvious he's the crazy Kennedy. If they come up with anything in terms of a takeaway, and yet he's still getting support. In terms of his speech last night, what is fascinating to me is we used to have this big debate, particularly within the Republican Party, but also globally here, about whether or not American politicians believed in the concept of American exceptionalism. This is a foreign policy speech last night. And what American exceptionalism is that somehow America is different from the rest of the world. It should lead around the rest of the world, and it should push American values because they are uniquely exceptional. That is not at all what happened, what he said last night. His was American policy should be humble. Who are we to get involved in Ukraine? It is a territorial dispute. Who are we to continue to push and bring F-16s to the fight? We should be talking directly to Vladimir Putin. We should have a more humble foreign policy and get out of this business. And then he would constantly cite his uncle, JFK, in terms of his foreign policy. So it was a part peacenik foreign policy, part strong on other values. He's still pro-Israel, for example. So it's kind of a mishmash, but it was a departure, kind of more in line with Donald Trump than in line with Joe Biden in terms of foreign policy.
If my Kennedy history serves me well, he sounds more in line, not JFK, but more like his grandfather, Joseph Kennedy, who famously was isolationist in the lead up to World War II. And which was, I don't know if that sort of tracks, but
that's what didn't go well. No, he was not invoking that so much, but I hear your point.
Yeah. So how is that message
remembered well for that?
Yeah. No, because it's what we were talking about, right? Like for going back to my childhood, I've been fascinated by the Kennedy family. JFK was one of my boyhood heroes, and so that's why I'm interested in what he has to say and his candidacy. But you mentioned that the support beyond just the intrigue of the Kennedy name and the Kennedy mystique, there are others who are attracted to his message. So how is it playing out, for example, in the crucial state of New Hampshire?
Yeah, look, number one, there's three denominators here, which we just don't know. I just don't know the mashup, and I don't think anyone really knows the mashup yet. Number one, are you into him because he's still a Kennedy? Is that still there? Second, are you into him because he's the number one person who is not Joe Biden, and you're a Democrat done with Biden, right? And third, are you sort of driven by the policy stuff? Are you actually into him, the vax stuff, or maybe this foreign policy stuff, or his anti-corporate message? But now, to answer your direct question, in New Hampshire is where he's had the most impact, and it's where he's going for it. And where there's a unique twist this year, which is that someone is going to win the New Hampshire primary, and it may not be the incumbent president, because the incumbent president at the moment is refusing to put his name on the ballot. So that means that someone is going to do it. Joe Biden is still in a kind of a fight with New Hampshire about its first in the nation role. New Hampshire will have the first in the nation primary. You can put that to the bank. The question is whether or not it matters and who actually shows up and competes in it. And so Joe Biden may be actually handing the New Hampshire primary, and oddly, even the Iowa caucuses, if it turns out in a certain way, to someone like RFK. And now Joe Biden's lost the two first primaries, and in New Hampshire's case, a swing state, and it could be a real problem. I think the New York Times put it this week that RFK is a real headache for Joe Biden, and I agree.
That's what we were just
talking about that.
Yeah, that whether, if it's not about a primary, then is there a possibility that he may run as a third party candidate? And could he be a bit of a spoiler?
Yeah, I think it's more likely that he would support a Republican at this point. I don't know.
Wow.
He could be a party. Look, here's the deal. I mean, you're not wrong. He's openly said it in a different piece earlier this week that the reason he ran for president is that the traditional mainstream media was shutting him out, particularly on his vax message, which he's leaning into. If I'm running for president, at least there's a way for me to get my message out. If he continues to be ignored, and obviously Democrats do not even plan on having a debate between him and Joe Biden's completely ignoring him, and I understand that. He's up by 40, 50 points. Then maybe he will do a third-party run, just again, to try to get more attention to issues that he deeply, deeply believes in, even if some of those are deeply, deeply scientifically flawed.
James Pindell,
really great
discussion.
Thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.